Okay, first question, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a very emotional type thing. It is emotional because of what the things you mentioned and described. However, there's a rational explanation why this is happening and a rational explanation of how it can be done. My name is Joe Nagy. I've been looking at housing crisis when I worked for Citibank. This is not the same thing. This crisis is due, isn't it, to the economics of supply and demand. There's too much demand for too little supply. So what's the solution to that? The solution is decentralization. Now, why hasn't it worked before? Very simple. Because the jobs did not go out there. Why didn't the jobs go out there? Businesses didn't go out there because there was not the transport system in place to get their goods and services into the Sydney market. That's the problem. We've got to decentralize. That'll take the pressure off this. This is not unimaginable. And the reason it's not happening is because of our stupid election system, which allows property developers to more than have their influence because they donate money to both political parties and they tell the political parties they're interested in seeing the stuff up here grow. So it's a complicated solution, but I really think the solution to it is to get the government to move outside of Sydney, put the roads out there, put the infrastructure out there, population will move, the jobs will move, and that'll take the pressure off housing here. It's a long-term solution, it's not easy, but that's my economic answer to it. Thank you. Well, that's my question too. Why isn't it happening?
Are you aware?
Did you say your name was Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Joe. Yes. I don't know why it's not happening because I'm not a politician or a senior bureaucrat. But what I can say from my perspective is that we have been involved in some conversations about decentralisation, and you also hear people saying, well, and you know, you've heard it on the radio, Alan Jones in particular. I don't ever listen to Alan Jones.
Good for you.
But you know, you hear it on these sort of talk shows where people say, why don't people move out to the regions or the rural areas if they can't afford to rent in the city? So the issue is that if decentralisation from an affordable housing sense doesn't only require housing to be built in those areas. I know that there are a lot of regional towns that their populations are declining because there is lack of economic development, there's lack of jobs, or there's lack of opportunities for young people to get jobs. So what we actually need is a regional economic development approach, which is the same as, I think, decentralisation. And I think you can't expect people to move out to a regional town because they choose to. If their opportunity, they might be able to get a house that's more affordable, but their opportunities for jobs or for jobs for their kids or all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, education could be limited. But if there was a strategy that was a whole of government, regional economic plan, and I know that some places like Orange in New South Wales, I think the Department of Planning actually moved one of their offices out there. They've got a whole office of staff out there. So some towns that have got particular industries like tourism or winemaking or I don't know, whatever, sheep farm, hospitals, medical, because Orange has got it's got a big hospital and medical services.
Universities.
Yeah. So I think if there's the attractors or the anchor employers that can be the central places where people can, there's already a decent sized population there, there's more of a chance of that happening. But also, if you're going to be delivering affordable housing, not just private rental housing or housing that is for purchase, there also needs to be some incentives or some subsidies, even in the regional areas, because land is also getting more expensive, for public housing or for community housing providers to deliver that so that it actually stacks up and it's financially viable for the long term. So there's a whole raft of policy solutions that need to be considered in a decentralisation approach. And I think there's a lot of really solid arguments about why that should happen, and I'm sure there's many people that would like to move to the country if they had the opportunities there and they had the lifestyle, and it didn't end up really bad and they end up moving back to the city. So I think there's a really good argument for that. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Maxine, I think I probably need to preface my question with the fact that I believe we should have a universal right to public housing, public health, public education and public transport.
Yeah.
And I think that we should use the terminology public.
Yes.
There's no shame in public provision. From the public, for the public, of course. But I want to ask a question about affordable housing, and I don't profess to have a lot of knowledge, which is dangerous, I know, but I understand social housing is the new term for public housing, but is it not the case that affordable housing is, some people can make money out of affordable housing? It's not just community housing, it's not just altruistic community organisations. Am I correct in thinking that affordable housing is a nice term that allows, a little bit like the Thatcher, I think it was Margaret Thatcher, who originally, instead of the government providing public housing, they gave money to public developers or landlords who then exploited people, really. And affordable housing, I believe, is that not what we've sold off, and we're demolishing public housing here in the inner city and replacing with affordable housing? So I'm concerned that affordable housing is replacing public housing. Is that correct?
Right.
And I'm also concerned that is it the case that affordable housing allows some people to make money out of it?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so some really good questions there, and this is, I'll go to the terminology of affordable housing because it is very, very confusing. The language of affordable housing, it has sort of overtaken itself. Whenever I have a conversation about affordable housing with someone in the sector, or if I'm talking to someone at council, local government, whatever, I need to make sure we both know what we're both talking about, because affordable housing could be considered as housing that it means that if you're on a lower income or a moderate income, you're not paying more than a certain percentage of your income in rent. So it could be that you're not in housing rental stress if you're on the lowest quintile, on the lowest level of income. So affordable housing could also be housing that is subsidised, so you're actually not paying any more than 80% of market rent. So there's that terminology. And it can be anything between 25 to 30% of your income, or it could be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% of market rent. Because some depend, so when you talk about affordable housing, there's a whole sliding scale of different subsidies that could be given to an affordable housing program that mean, say, a block of units in Glebe that's affordable housing. The policy for that, say, community housing provider might be that they won't charge more than 74.9% of market rent. So you get a 25% discount. Whereas another block of units somewhere else that's funded under a different program, and it's got more government subsidies, or it was built with a capital grant or something, they can afford to charge between 55% and 74.9% of market rent, so that they're charging less for people on lower incomes than they would for people on market income, moderate incomes. So that's the different income and rent model. affordable housing is also a term that is used for social and affordable housing together. So that means I might talk about, okay, what we need is more affordable housing, and when I'm talking about that generically, that can be an umbrella term that relates to public housing, community housing and affordable housing for people on moderate incomes. So people on very low incomes, so people that are on minimum wage, for example, and then people that earn about 60 or 70,000 a year. So that whole suite of tenure types, public, community, Aboriginal housing and affordable housing, could all be talked about as affordable housing. So even me just saying all this is probably confusing, and that is what we are. And when we met with Minister Rob Stokes a few weeks ago, we had this very conversation that there must be something done about the term affordable housing, because it is used in so many different ways that people don't understand what it is and what it isn't. And if we want to educate the community about the difference or the availability of affordable housing, because whenever I get in a cab, I have a chat with a taxi driver, and I say, they ask where you live, and then they ask me where I work, and then they ask about public housing or how do I get on the list, and then I talk to them about affordable housing, because I'm making an assumption that they might be eligible for affordable housing because they're working, and maybe not eligible for social, but they could be. And then I tell them about affordable housing, and 9 times out of 10 they have never heard of affordable housing or that it even exists, and that it's different to the Housing Commission list. People don't know that there's this product called affordable housing that is for people that are on a different level of income. But also, if you're on the social housing register, you're also usually eligible for affordable housing depending on the programme. So it's very convoluted, but affordable housing usually gets a lesser subsidy than social housing, because the rents you can get from it should be generally higher. And it's also got different policy and eligibility criteria depending on what programme it's funded under. So your other question was about people making profits out of affordable housing. I think the affordable housing set, and this is where my planning expertise comes in, or otherwise. Sue, you've been on the course, you should be able to correct me. So I know that for example, new generation boarding houses, they were, there's boarding houses that are supposed to be delivered for people that are on lower incomes. But what developers have done with that, they have developed boarding houses under the affordable housing planning instruments, and they have rented them out at market rents.
Yeah, so 500 a week.
Yeah. So they're doing that, and it is actually they've got the benefit of the density and the affordable housing and how many units you can get, etc., because they've used that planning instrument. But they're now charging market rent, and it's usually to students or other people, or low-income workers, and it means that they're not charging affordable housing or allocating it to affordable housing under an affordable housing type policy. And the regulation is so crap that they're allowed to do it. And we haven't published it yet. It will be published, it might have been today, but there's a piece of research we just got City Futures to do on that very piece about the impact of boarding houses and the delivery and the growth of those in Sydney, and the impacts on density and equitable density, etc. The other question that you had was about the sale of public housing and then using that money to fund affordable. My understanding, and I can check this out with the relevant minister or people, because we often ask them questions when there's, we're not clear on where they've actually spent the money. My understanding is that the sale of public housing assets should fund the delivery of social housing. Public housing assets, they may not stay as public housing, because if they're going to be managed by a community housing provider, they would be what you call community housing. But they are still they're still part of the social housing net numbers.
Public housing partners.
Yeah, and people that are on the housing register are the people that would be eligible to move into those. So the government is supposed to not have a net loss from the sale of the Miller's Point in Sirius and all of that. But the reality is, and they've argued that they're actually going to generate a lot more because they're building properties in lower value land areas and they can get more bang for their buck. But the reality is that there's a lag. There's a 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 7 year gap between when they got that money and when they build that property. So what we're concerned about is, you might sell 100 properties. Well, we're concerned that they're selling the properties in the first place. But you might sell 100 properties, and you're not going to replace that 100 properties in 2018-19. They're not going to actually be built until 2023-24. So in the meantime, the number of houses in the system is declining until they catch up with the lag. So that's a big issue, and it's becoming more and more opaque for organisations like Shelter New South Wales to get the real understanding and accountability on where that money is. And we have also just released our budget commentary today. God, we've done a lot this week. And that actually talks about that very issue, that we are not clear on where the money has gone from Miller's Point, what's happening with Communities Plus. Are you double counting or are you not double counting, and how many properties are actually being delivered? Right, well, this is one of the things that we're going to be investigating further. So I think I've answered all your questions.
Okay, the next one there's Jim McCoy and then
Yeah, thanks very much, Karen. I just wanted to raise another issue, which is really at the centre of the discussion at the moment. And you mentioned the fact that we need to make housing into a major political issue, different to what it appears to have been in the last federal election, where it somehow morphed into a win for Morrison. The whole negative gearing thing got totally out of whack and affected the whole discussion in the wrong way. I just want to mention about the towers crises that we're seeing and the crisis of apartment buildings.
Yeah.
People in Mascot Towers and in other places have paid $1 million, not for a house but for an apartment, and now it's worth nothing.
Yeah.
And there is a massive corruption problem, what can only be described as a corruption problem in the housing system in Australia. You have got the privatisation of all the people that are
certification.
Yeah, doing the guarantee of housing work, and yet most of these apartments were a high proportion. Someone said 80%. One of the representatives of the strata owners was saying that 80% of apartments have got critical problems. So, we're actually, I think that the possibility there is if we want to make housing, and in the modern day that often means apartments, to become a major political issue among young people, then we've got to sort of link up all the things you've been talking about with this incredible problem of corruption. The New South Wales government has totally privatised everything, but they've also privatised the guarantee of safety and quality in housing. And I think if we could somehow link up those issues, maybe we could make this housing crisis a problem that can really hit the coalition governments instead of going the other way. Comment, please.
They were told this would happen. They were told.
okay.
Okay, so this is a very timely question because I think there was another block of units last week where people were evacuated and I don't know if people know Mark Singer. He's a Shelter in New South Wales member. He's a housing advocate. Used to work in government, and he's a supporter of Shelter. So he's written 2 articles for Shelter New South Wales about the first one was about the Opal Tower and the whole debacle of deregulation and cutting out red tape and that whole planning system and certification system and how it's failing. And he also wrote another article about that for us, which was published yesterday. This is my opportunity to do all our plugs, isn't it? So he wrote on the Shergold Weir report, he wrote an article about this is 4 buildings now, and he's written
Not just the ones we know about.
Yeah, that's just the ones that have been, highlighted. 5, yeah. So he wrote a really great op-ed piece, which was published in the Fifth Estate yesterday, and it's also that's been published, and it talks about all of the things you just mentioned. But it also specifically for Shelter New South Wales, because we worked with him on an article like this, and he's got the technical expertise. What we're really concerned about is, as I mentioned before, is the people that are going to be most affected by this are people on low incomes, people that have got no savings. So the people that are affected, that are homeowners, that's one thing. But a lot of these buildings are now occupied by people that are private renters. A lot of people that are private renters would normally or ordinarily be eligible for social housing. Those people are now forced to rent in the private rental market. They rent in the private rental market, they compete with people that are earning a lot more money than them, but they're paying the same rent. They're paying 70% of their income in rent. This household next door is paying 30% of their income in rent because they've got a good job and all of the above. So if you've got more and more low-income people that are vulnerable, marginalised, disadvantaged, whatever terminology you want to label someone with, and I apologise for that, but this is just to describe, they will not have the options or the choice or the agency often, or the understanding of how to navigate the system or the access to legal advice to sort out, when they're standing on the pavement, they're in actually a worse situation than the people they're standing next to. And with more and more density and more shortcuts being taken with low quality builds, because it's developers making a quick buck and a profit, and they just build and sell on
the skills to build.
the skills. No, that's right. So we are really concerned, and this is why Shelter New South Wales has commissioned research on low quality housing. And we also we commissioned 3 pieces of research called Equitable Density in 2017. So that was 3 reports, and it's all about the impacts of high density, compact cities and buildings that are, bad quality, badly designed, badly located, all of the above, and how low-income people are most affected, and that's evidence-based. So we are looking at this as being part of our policy agenda, because I think this is, as Mark Singer said, this is the tip of the iceberg, what we've actually seen now. And all will be revealed, I'm sure, but it's, we absolutely urgently need something to be done about that.
And dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
My name is Hilary. I just really wanted to ask you, you mentioned we don't have any policy like Canada and the UK.
Yeah.
What are those policies? And I think that with the collapse of the newly built apartment buildings, we are at crunch time, and now we will have public certification again. I mean, it was Bob Carr who got rid of it, that stupid man. I mean, it was just so obvious what was going to happen. So you are just lobbying on particular points to the government. What are the things you are focusing on this year, and what social housing is planned by the New South Wales government for this year, next year?
Right. Thank you. What's her name again?
Hillary.
Hillary. Thank you, Hillary. So we're lobbying on quite a few things, and I wouldn't call it lobbying, I'd call it advocacy, policy influence. We, firstly, about the National Housing Strategy. So we do now have a housing minister, but we don't have a National Housing Strategy. So we've got across Australia, I know he hasn't got to it yet, probably. But we also don't have a statewide housing strategy. We have a policy in New South Wales called Future Directions in Social Housing, and we've also got a homelessness strategy that looks at having street homelessness by 2025, I think. Is that the right date soon? Yeah. So what we're asking the government to do is have a national housing strategy that sets out not just what they're going to do in social housing, but what they're going to do across relevant parts of the system to impact on better housing outcomes for people, particularly people on lower incomes. So a national housing strategy would have dedicated money for the delivery of public housing and community housing and Aboriginal housing, and it would be these are the outcomes that need to be delivered by delivering that housing. So that needs to include strategies that link into the NDIS. So this strategy will link into other government departments' relevant policies. So it would link in with the health policies, it would link in with aged care, it would link in with disability policies, it would link it would link in with think about welfare
You're going to have to use your powerful voice now. Hello, hello.
Try.
Can you just yell?
Yeah. So that's what we're asking government to do, is to so sorry, it's really
Yes, it's distracting.
So we would advocate for money for housing that will support people to live in permanent housing. Not just we don't advocate for more crisis accommodation, because we see that as a band-aid. We advocate for money that will deliver affordable rental housing, there's that word, and that includes public and social housing.
How much are you thinking of in terms of for this year?
Are you talking about New South Wales or Australia?
New South Wales.
We haven't actually come up with a number, because if we come up with a number, it will scare the horses. We talk about it in numbers of units. So we've actually said we think Shelter New South Wales has got an election policy platform. It's on our website, and we've asked for at least 5,000 social housing units a year for 20 years, and about, I think it's 7,000 affordable housing units, which is for the next income level. But that's just to keep on top of what we've got. And I mentioned some of those big figures before, where there's a need for 140,000 social housing units just in Sydney over the next 20 years, so all of those numbers. But we don't say we want it to be for a hostel or for this, but we would say if it's for people that are currently homeless, rough sleepers, there should be housing and support services so that those people can move into housing with support straight away. What VF? Oh, gosh, another acronym. Well, the Greater Sydney Commission has got a plan for a metropolis across Sydney. So they're actually looking at developing cities, including housing and infrastructure and employment opportunities, and they're looking at a 30-minute city. So if you go from one place to the other, it should not take more than 30 minutes. That's their dream. That's the thinking.
There is a cap on the cost of the open ticket. Does that apply as far as, say, Gospels?
I'm not sure.
If it does, it makes it really feasible, doesn't it?
It's a weekly cap.
Yes, does that apply as far out as Gospels?
No, it's just how much you use in a week. That's it. There's a cap on it.
So it's feasible for people to move.
Yeah.
If they had a very fast track, reduce the time, makes it feasible.
And your question about how much social housing is being delivered, the
What's
community.
their plan for next year?
Right. Not enough. The plan, the Social and Affordable Housing Fund from government, which has been driven by Treasury, is going to be delivering about 3,200, remember that number, properties in about 7 years across New South Wales. And the Communities Plus programme is going to deliver about 7,000 units in 10 years. So how much does that add up to? 10! In 10 years. So that is what is being delivered through what we currently know. That is separate to what the community housing sector is delivering in their own right through their own leveraging and their borrowing through the NIFIC and Clean Energy Finance or wherever they get their money. So they've all got their separate development and delivery programs, whereas state government, the things that they're managing, they've got about 10,000 over the next 10 years, plus they will also use the sale of places like Millers Point and Sirius to deliver other housing units. But what we're not sure of is, does that 10,000 include the use of that money that we thought shouldn't be used for that? So we're going to get that clarified.
Okay. Now, because there's no microphones, you just give your question and your name.
Yell out.
Your name.
Okay. My name's Peter Muller. I was listening to you talk about Lewis Point and all that, and I must admit I was living and working from that in the CB, labouring for nigh on 25 years before they can try to kick us out. My main question is, I've heard things, my main genuine concern is, I don't think this government even cares about public housing. It's all just speak. I do believe it has been brought up about corruption. I think the most classic thing I've ever seen is there was a point there. I mean, you had something that actually worked there. I mean, it worked for over 100 years, but long before public housing there, and it worked, and it was good for the community.
Yeah.
The community, it was everything that they wanted to model. They used to be proud of the place.
Yeah.
Until greed came in and they just decided to kill it off.
Yeah.
For money. And my big thing is I don't believe that the sale of Millers Point is supposed to be supporting the 50,000 there. I never believe that at all. Not when you've got stamp duties, income of over $1 million, absolutely, over $1 billion at the same time.
Yeah.
Pretend that
Yeah.
crap. Oh, I mean, it's a lot of money that they did get there, but it was also the jewel certainly in sort of, I can see New South Wales public housing and been there and it's been really effective. I mean, I lived and worked there, first in the boarding houses, And that was, we had all the tradies, we had waitresses, we had all sorts of people, all on lower incomes, but taxi drivers, posting, for local posting, people, neighbours, things like this. The thing is, I don't know how we can actually force this government to actually spend money on public housing, because they just quite literally don't want to. They want the exact opposite.
Okay, is that your question?
I just need someone, just don't know how, you guys haven't got any ideas on how to actually physically force them to sort of say, no, forget that. We do need 5,000 units there, but by the way, we don't want them. We don't need them out there. We need them where the work opportunities are. I always remember a friend of mine from there, as far as she was concerned, that living in Millers Point, originally under the Maritime and that, I mean, that saved her life. You know, she was a single mum with 3 kids. With all the work opportunities in there for them, but close to the schools and that, it was an absolute saviour for her. Great things and that. They did have something there that they do have ideas of work, but they just killed it off. You know, I mean, they had that. I mean, they complained about a peppercorn. We had sort of like our own community bloody aged care there, and they killed it off because instead of the peppercorn rent, I think it was $24 a month that they had been paying. All of a sudden they had to pay $240,000 a year, and it just killed it off. You know. And I don't know. I can't see how they're going to do it. I was just wondering if you had any ideas how you're going to force them to get the 5,000 units that you
7,000.
Yep. Well.
I mean, you need a
Come on, wrap that and let that go.
What was your name again? Sorry. Peter. Yes, Peter. To force government, I think. No, I don't think. I mean, they say you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, but I don't know if that would work with government.
What about getting Four Corners to do a program on social housing?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen.
Let's forget about
Yeah, I've seen the film The Eviction by Blue Lucine. Were you in that film? So Barney and I've forgotten his friend's name. It was centred on 2 or 3 of the characters in the documentary were people that were impacted, and the woman that was 94, the last person to leave.
That's Sirius,
Yeah, in Sirius. So it was all about Millers Point and Sirius, and it was. I mean, I've seen the film twice because I was on a panel session with Dallas Rogers and others about that film, and there was a parliamentary showing of the film as well at Parliament House. It's going to be on again at the Festival of Urbanism with Peter Phipps. So I think that film, The Eviction, is something that I actually spoke to some of the staff at Family and Community Services about the film, and they want to get some of their staff to come and watch it. So I mean, we talk about this all the time, that you can give policy papers and research documents to people and talk to them, to governments, but it's not only their mind you've got to connect with, it's their heart and their humanity and their compassion, and they are, politicians are also human beings. So
only some of them.
Yeah, but so I think it's things like that those sorts of stories and the impact on dismantling a community from Millers Point that was established in 1893, and now that community is gone. That is, that's criminal, And I did have a conversation with Minister Gareth Ward about this very thing when I met him a few weeks ago, and his position is that we can get 5 over here, by selling one of those there. That was exactly how he said it. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but you've got to consider more than the numbers. And this is going back to this is about trying to get government and ministers to care. I think you use the word care. If we don't get people to care about these sorts of things, they're not going to change their minds. So they've actually got to care, and the people that are advising them have got to care. And they've got to really understand that this isn't just about dollars here and dollars there. It's about human lives, it's about whole communities, it's about the fabric of Sydney in this case. Yeah, it's about losing that history and that community and that heritage.
I think the other thing, Karen, that we have slightly in the favour of the advocates, like Shelter or the TU, is that risk of homelessness is becoming about us now. It's no longer them.
That's right.
It's people over there. It's about us.
Yes.
It's about our kids. It's about our older mothers who don't have the superannuation.
Yeah.
So I think the language is the heart is shifting because it's suddenly going to be about me.
Yes. Or someone I know.
Or someone I know.
That isn't one of those people.
That's right. And so I do think there is opportunity to push in a slightly different way and get different people, not just the likes of Politics in the Pub, which is a group of people that come together with a good political heart, but the neighbours, your neighbours, the people who don't come to this, actually caring about this and wanting to do something. So things like creating, some of those get up type campaigns, like the letter writing campaigns and stuff, which you can do very simply, actually do work because it suddenly resonates with people.
Yeah.
Okay. Just one more thing. We'll have Stephen, then we'll have the wrap up from Karen.
Just a quickie. I grew up in London and I had the typical attitude of someone who lived in a private house to people who lived in council housing. Until I got a paper round, and then I found that at Christmas, the people who in the council housing were much more generous and much more nicer than the people who lived in the private. Anyway, but the thing is, one thing comes to mind, and that is the Four Corners. Some time ago, which was on housing and infrastructure. And Four Corners are seeming to be more and more dodgy as the months go past. But what the thing was, why weren't you on it? Why didn't they not ask you to be on it? Because surely that's an obvious thing to ask, rather than the couple at the end who are smiling and happy and saying, oh yeah, we've got 7 houses we're investing in. Why were you not on it?
Don't know. They didn't ask me.
We also need to try and get you on the drum, honey. Yeah.
I know. Well, can you do that for me?
I'll try.
Be my agent.
Never think about how.
Yeah. Then we can do that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Here, we're in for the wrap up now. Okay.
Okay, wrap.
Oh God. Right.
Dance.
I said a hip, hip hop. Is that how you do a rap?
No.
Okay. Okay. I've written down some of the questions that people have come up with, and it sounds. I mean, this is all really good data and information for me to hear the sort of questions that you're coming up with. So my wrap up would be that this, to fix or create the best solutions to the housing crisis takes everyone, like people like you in this room. I mean, I talked before about we need to use our power and advocacy, and we work with organisations like the Sydney Alliance. They're the organisations that also work on the ground with people to get the hearts in the mind and the human stories. I think, as I said, we need to do things differently. We need, like Sue said, connecting, really being intentional about how we change politicians' minds and bureaucrats' minds about what matters and what, who cares and why should we. So we are looking at the advocacy and the messaging and the policy influence that we do in partnership with lots of other organisations, needing to take a different approach. That it is, and it's the opposite of what government has done. Government has residualised social housing. They have, it's like a race to the bottom. That's what they've done with it. and we actually need to say, well, if we want to make a difference, we've got to talk about why that is negatively impacting everybody, and the system, the community, the economy. Because if we talk the word economy and infrastructure, oh, you're talking a different language. You're talking a language I understand. So we've actually got to appeal with different language without compromising the social justice, the inequality, the human rights, the universal housing principles. We've got to balance all of those messages, and that's what we're doing. And slowly doing that, because if we continue to focus on the housing crisis as being a welfare problem, different people listen differently, or they will stop listening, because a welfare issue is not what they're interested in. They're often, especially with certain types of government, and I can't make any comment on that because I have to be non-partisan, of course, but certain types of government would not be interested in the word welfare unless they are pointing the finger and saying, well, this is about individuals, they've done that to themselves. We're all about the economy and the infrastructure and GDP. We have got to we've got to connect with them with that language and use the arguments of social and economic infrastructure. But also Dr. Emma Power, who's at she's Sydney Uni, I think she's at Sydney Uni. She wrote a really good article recently about how housing must create care, a safety network, how it can deliver your care for you and enable you to care for yourself, your family and your community. And currently our housing system doesn't do that. So she brought the care word into that social and economic and care conversation. She is a really good article actually. So we've started using that terminology in our conversations, because the care bit, everyone can connect with that, can't they? So I think it's about changing the narrative, changing the conversation, using the evidence over and over again, and looking at who it affects. I think that's what we've got to do. But also recognising that the community and more people out there in the community are affected by the housing crisis, and they should also use their, power, agency, whatever you want to call it, to advocate, to talk about this, about, these are your misconceptions when I do it all the time. People have got all these stories about why we're, it's a bit like the franking credits argument that was happening, and people got convinced it was that when it was not, So we've actually got a responsibility as a community to get the facts out there, and break down those myths.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Karen.